Hi, I'm back. Yeah, so on Sunday, I had to step out. Sarah's having a few complications, giving us all a bit of a scare. So she actually pulled through really well. We went to the doctor yesterday. She's doing a lot better now, so she's definitely back on the road to recovery. So I just want to thank everyone who was praying for us. Your prayers were definitely felt over, particularly Sunday as well as yesterday so yeah, just thank you for that. Now we have a bit of a problem now because we're going through this series, and well, obviously the second service you didn't get to hear the message that I had prepared. The first service you guys did. So what I was thinking of doing is just putting a short little video just to try to do a bit of a recap, so a shorter version of what Sunday was about. So hopefully you'll be able to bear with me with that. And if you're in the first service, you're probably saying, why didn't he do the short version in the first place? So yeah, anyway, let's get into it. So yeah, the series we've been talking about is called Parenting for Life. And so we've been looking at how on earth do we parent? How do we do this? How do we do this well? Last week we looked at sort of using our time that we have. So looking at really the future and what our kids trying to see what they could be. And I sort of said, well, instead of asking that question of, what do I want my kids to become when they grow up? What do I want them to do? We should actually change and reframe that question to who do we want our children to become, which sort of talks about character building. And see, when we set our goal and our mind on character building, it changes how we parent. It changes what the wins for us as parents are in our life. Now, also last time in the last message, we spoke about how parenting isn't just for the parents. That actually it involves a whole wider community. And so I asked us to think about as a church, what would the win be when we're looking at building character in our youth today? So that then leads us on to this week. Last week now. On Sunday, I talked about creating a rhythm. See, families already, whether we realize it or not, have a rhythm. Now, we have rhythm of how we do things, how we wake up and that sort of thing. For us as a family, we have a rhythm of when we wake up in the morning, I'll do a devotion for myself. I'll have some quiet time. I'll have some breakfast. The kids are still sleeping, and then, I've got to try to get them up. And so we have this bit of a rhythm in the morning. And then Sarah and myself will take them to school, and we'll go off to work. Then we pick them up after school, either Sarah or myself, and then we take them off to like sporting practices or sports playing. Also, there's dance and music, all these different things that are part of our rhythm as a family. Then also at night time when we eat around the table at night, we have a bit of a rhythm or a pattern in our family where we always try to eat together at night time, where we can, share what's been happening, talk about some stuff, what's been happening in life, and particularly, I suppose, that day. Then also, at bedtime rituals, Sarah has a particular bedtime ritual. I tend to just say good night, kids, and that sort of thing. But it's some sort of rhythm that we have within our family. So when we're talking about creating a rhythm, we're actually talking about not creating more time or trying to create something else. It's actually trying to utilize that time that we already have with our kids, trying to make the most of that morning time, trying to make the most of those times that we spent with our kids in the very normal things that we have in our rhythms of our life. And so the passage that I was reading comes from Deuteronomy 6, verses 1 to 12. Now, just to get a bit of a backstory of what's happening here with this. The Israelites, they're free from slavery in Egypt, and they've been wandering the desert for 40 odd years. And they come to the promised land. They come to the river. Just on the other side of that river is the promised land. And before they go over, God, through Moses, has some important instructions to give to his people. So he wanted to give them some warnings and some instructions of that. So what were some of these warnings? Firstly, God, through Moses, tells the people that he actually wants life to go well for them in this new land that he was giving them. And in order for that to happen, he was saying to them, you're going to need to follow these commands that I give you. Otherwise, you're actually going to get pulled away from me. So God gave Moses this list of commands that he wanted his people to live by. Now, these rules are just, or commands, are just like how parents might give their kids a set of guidelines for living, or for what they want their kids. The rules aren't, or guidelines, or whatever, aren't there to try to suppress kids or try to suppress the Israelites in this case, in this passage. It was actually there for them to have a full life in this new land. See, God is their creator. He knows just what is great for his people. He knows just how he built them and knows just how he wants them to live. So the first command that he gives his people is also what Jesus called one of the greatest commands, which was, and this comes from verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. See, as a nation, Israel were going to occupy a land that already had people in it. The people already in that land believed in multiple gods. They had a God for everything. And here God, through Moses, is saying, hey, you might be going into this new land, but you are my people. You know me. You know that there is only one God. And listen up to these commands that I'm giving you through Moses, because I want this to go well for you. A few chapters later on, Moses also goes on to say about loving the stranger in your community, which then is the other part of when Jesus was talking about the greatest command, which was love the Lord your God, but then also to love others, love your neighbor. I wonder though, when we look at our own life, if we think about how full of stuff our life is, I wonder if sometimes we actually get caught up in living, caught up in all the day-to-day things where we actually just forget about God. In fact, the problem with the Israelites, and we see this all throughout the Old Testament, is that they actually didn't heed the warnings that God gave them. They actually, at times, followed other gods. They actually didn't follow the commands that God gave them. And sometimes, we can look at them and we can go, those Israelites, they were silly people. Why didn't they just do what God said? But I also then look at my own life, and I know how I can get distracted sometimes. I know how I can take my eyes off God and look all around me at the things that he has given me. And so, why I can sit there and say, you Israelites are silly. I also look at myself and I go, gee, Evan, you're silly as well. But the Israelites were called to a higher purpose. They were God's chosen people. And we are too. We're called for something much higher. We've been called to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and strength. So how do we do that? How do we do that not only for ourselves, but also how do we do that for our next generation? How do we sort of really make that part of who they are? Understanding that God is one and that we can love him with everything we have. So the answers are actually quite simple, and Moses actually goes on to give them to us in this passage of Deuteronomy 6. In verse 7, this is what Moses says: impress them on your children, talking about the law. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and of your gates. When I read that, I realize that even how this was written thousands and thousands of years ago, that a lot of things haven't changed. Families and communities still have rhythms. We have a morning rhythm where we get up and have breakfast. How can we use that time? How can we use that time better to influence our kids, influence the next generation to loving God with all their heart and to loving their neighbor? I love this opportunity that we have as parents and as a wider community to make mornings a special time, to make mornings a time of encouragement, where we actually let go of the things that may have happened yesterday. You may bring them up later in the day, but in the morning, it's about a fresh start. And when we look at our relationship with Jesus, we understand we get that fresh start when we choose to believe in him. So when we model this every single morning to our kids, that every morning you have a fresh start. You might have did some stuff yesterday, but I'm not going to hold that against you today. Today is a new day. Today is a fresh start. When we model that as parents, we're actually modeling a reflection of our Heavenly Father, and kids can pick up on that. Now, in Moses' time, we read there that, when we're walking, travel was very different back in Moses' time to what it is now. Remember, they walked in the desert for 40 years. But today, we still spend a lot of time traveling together in cars, as families, as grandparents, when you're traveling with your grandkids, if you might pick them up from school. You might go shopping. There's sports. There's a whole lot of time that we spend traveling. How can we leverage that time when we're sitting in a car to help build a legacy, to help build those things that we've been called to do? It doesn't matter how old your kids are. Drive time is actually a really important time. Now, I don't know about you. I remember when my kids were younger, you'd ask them about their day, and the whole time you're traveling would just be talking non-stop from where you picked them up from all the way to home, and excited about what had happened in their day. If something bad happened, they'd tell you, and maybe that's an opportunity then to pick that up later. But drive time is really important. Now, I've also come to learn that as kids get older, you might, when they hop in the car and you say, "How'd your day go?" And they say, "Good." And then you say, "Well, what'd you do?" "Nothing." And you're going, "Oh, well, that's just ended that conversation." But drive time, even with older kids, is just as important as it is with little ones. You need to start talking about those things that interest them, trying to not just ask closed questions of yes or no, but trying to ask those questions that will invite feedback. And if you build this culture of talking, letting them talk about their day, of listening to what's been happening in their day, if you build that rhythm from when they're little for that drive time, as they get older, they'll come to understand that drive time is a time when my parents are going to listen to what I have to say. And so there's opportunities there if they've had a bad day, as teenagers, that they'll be able to share that with you. As I already shared, that meal times in our house is a really important time. And in the time of Moses, we see that meal times were as important time for them, where it wasn't just the single family unit. It was more the extended family would come together for meal times, where stories would be shared about the day, where issues maybe in the community would be talked about. And alongside that would be children listening, but not only just listening, probably participating and sharing as well. And that's what I see as a really important time for mealtime, a time where you can turn the TV down, turn the phone on silent, or maybe put it right out of arm's reach, where you just focus on each other. And if you really want to bring some intentionality into that time of eating together, you can bring up a verse maybe, or bring up a topic that you'd like to talk about over that particular meal, where you invite conversation to flow. And if you handle that well, and not, if someone comes up with a bit of an out there idea, not to put them down, but to listen and understand from when they come from. If you can do that, meal times become very, very important. Every family has, as I said before, has a bedtime rhythm, and as kids get older, it changes. For younger kids, I remember spending time of putting them in bed, reading them a story, listening to those deeper things that they'd want to talk about. I know for both of our kids, they will, when it's time to go to bed, it's often then when they want to share about the things that have been troubling them, or the things that are on their mind. And sometimes it's really easy to get caught up with, oh, this is the bedtime. You're supposed to be in bed by now, instead of being able to listen and talk through and hear what they're trying to say to you. But I think as parents, we've got to try to balance that. I don't do it well. I'm still growing in this, but there's an opportunity there where at night time, where our brains are slowly, not distracted by other things, and they just want to start to process what's happened throughout the day, that we actually really stop and take notice of what our kids are trying to say during those times. As I said, it's something that I've still got a bit of work to do on myself, but I'm going to work on it. Grandparents, you get to be involved in this as well, because sometimes you're looking after the grandkids and they're staying overnight, and you have an opportunity to build and have those deeper conversations if the kids are up for that sort of thing. It's an important time where you get to share. It's an important rhythm, that really needs to be built in and cultivated within the rhythms of your family. Now, I hope you can see that these times that we've talked about, getting up time, drive time, meal time, and going to bed, they're all actual natural rhythms in families' lives already. We actually don't need to try to find more time. Oh, I've got to find more time to fit this in, or find more time to do this or that. It's actually about using those rhythms that are already there to actually utilize them and be intentional about those rhythms, where we can actually build up a legacy in our kids, a legacy of faith, getting them to understand who God is, and sharing our faith with them. But the thing that's going to hold us back, though, the one thing that's going to stop us is what are we trying to do? Are we trying to build a legacy, or are we trying to just give over an inheritance? It's not until we really grapple with that question and answer it for ourselves that we'll actually be intentional in these times. So for parents out there, please, think about these times that are already in our life, and how can we be more intentional with those times? How can we try to build some faith? How can we, work towards our end goal of building character in our kids? But I also said earlier that parenting isn't just for parents. And we need to look at this as a church community as well, because our church has a rhythm of its own, just like a family does. We have a set ways, set patterns of doing things when it comes to services, when it comes to ministries, even when we get together, um, the rhythms of how we do that, and what is our focus during those times. Because, see, when we're looking at our rhythms, whether it be in family or church, our rhythms actually point to what we value. So if our rhythms are valuing an inheritance to pass on and not actually building a legacy in our kids, that'll actually show through in our rhythms about what we're trying to do every time we sort of come together. So I think for us as a church community, we actually need to identify those rhythms and the patterns as a church community. Are those rhythms and patterns about building legacy in our kids and youth that are already here? Or are they more about maybe passing on a way to do ministry, a way to do worship services, rather than building a legacy within our kids for them to not only just copy us, but to go on and do better, to have a deeper relationship with Jesus than what we ever had, to have a far wider mission than what we ever had. Because that's what I'm wanting for our kids and youth in this place. To go on, not just to copy, but to go far better than this generation, to go far deeper than what we ever had. And in order to do that, it may actually mean that we need to do some things differently. It may mean we need to have a look at our way we do things. Is it actually a way of building up a legacy, or is it just passing something on, passing on an inheritance? So I actually challenge people to talk about this at home or in the car, um, to talk about how to do this. I've got some questions for you. I will post them up in the community group um, later, just so you can have them there. So here are the questions to talk about, chat about, maybe in your small groups over this week. The first one is, what is your family rhythm? Have you actually identified that these family patterns that I've already talked about, the waking up pattern? What is your family pattern there? What is your family pattern when it comes to drive time when you're driving everywhere? What about when at mealtime? What's your family pattern at mealtime? Lastly, what's your family pattern when it comes to bedtime? Are we really being intentional about those times in building a legacy in our kids? So also, where can we be more intentional in that rhythm? How can we be more intentional in those natural rhythms that are already a part of our family or our church family when we look at our church family rhythm as well? And lastly, how can we be more intentional in our church rhythm? So, how can we, when we're thinking about our services, when we get together, our ministries, how can we be more intentional with building a legacy in the kids and youth that are already here in our church community? How can we be more intentional about building a legacy with the natural rhythms that we have as a church community? Um, as you're talking about that, if you have some great ideas, or the Holy Spirit, I believe, talks to all of us, not just to me, but to all of us as a church community, to lead and to guide and direct. So if you feel God speaking to you about maybe changes that may need to happen to help build a legacy, I'd love to hear them and talk with you about that, because I believe God is wanting far more for our church than just to pass things on to our kids. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have a real great week. Thank you for your prayers for Sarah. She is doing so much better. Yeah, have a great week, guys. Thank you.